if you see it, I grew up on a horse farm. I competed in the Junior Olympics, and I attribute the hard work to waking up at 4:30 in the morning and sloshing water buckets from the back of the house in the winter, splashing on my leg, and shoveling manure and haying in 110-degree weather. Like, that's where the hard work ethic, that's the tool in the toolbox. Like, that's what I can draw back on to say that was what it was.
You're listening to Granite Goodness, the podcast where we interview New Hampshire people making the world a better place.
Oh, Susie, where are you going now?
My name is Andy DeMeo. This episode was sponsored by and recorded in Treeline Outfitters in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Today, I'm speaking to my good friend and mentor, serial entrepreneur, and self-described incurable optimist, Ian Grant. Ian currently serves as the special advisor to donor relations at the African Wildlife Foundation. Our conversation covers entrepreneurship, international development, business competitions, Lord of the Rings, and a million other things I hope you enjoy on today's episode of Granite Goodness. I'm here today in Treeline Outfitters with my friend Ian Grant. Ian.
So nice to be here, Andy. Love this space at Treeline, and so excited to be here and to be part of your amazing podcast series.
Yeah, pleasure to have you. So this pod is sponsored by Treeline Outfitters. Treeline Outfitters is an outdoor retailer and tap room that brings you the best gear for your next adventure, focusing on authenticity, community, the environment, and inspiring others. Our goal is to bring the great outdoors and adventure to you. I think that's a pretty good pitch.
It's a great pitch.
What do you think about that?
And the only thing is, I wish we weren't doing this at 8 in the morning because that beer is already smelling pretty good.
I'm so excited to have you as the first guest on here. Well, I shouldn't say that because I've technically promised the title of first guest to like a dozen different people right now, but you actually are the first one.
But I'm the 12th first guest.
You are the 12th first guest and the actual first guest. You describe yourself as an incurable optimist on your LinkedIn. Why?
Ever since I can remember, that's who I've been. As a 5-year-old, as a 7-year-old, even those recess playground challenges, I always thought that it would get better. And so I think somehow, whether it's nature or nurture, I don't quite know. I had amazingly supportive parents. It just was always a belief that I could figure it out, that I could plow through it. If I was smart and lucky, I could get around whatever the challenge is, personal, academic, later business. It's just that belief. You can't fake it.
Yeah.
Like for me, I can't fake it.
Right.
I can't speak for the people. I can't fake being an incurable optimist. It's just there, and it gets me through, and it makes me see things in a way that creates opportunities.
Sure. I mean, you have such a unique and storied career. I don't even know how to sum you up, I guess.
Eclectic.
Yeah, that's one word for it. So we just heard the little pitch for Treeline Outfitters, which is great. And maybe we should have a little context here for how we met. So I met you at the University of New Hampshire Entrepreneurship Center when I was, thanks to your tutelage and great guidance, you at that time were the director and basically creator, the founder, you might say, of the Entrepreneurship Center. And I was participating in the Social Venture Innovation Challenge. It's this great idea entrepreneurship competition that UNH has. And you coached me and helped me pitch my idea, do well in the competition. And we spent a lot of time talking about pitches and entrepreneurship and all this stuff. I guess a funny question I have for you, what is the pitch for Ian Grant? You got 15 seconds.
Wow.
What's the Ian pitch?
Right off the bat, put me in the spot.
I could think of one.
Okay.
I don't know what you said.
I may have you coach me and some payback
Unstoppable, incurable, eclectic, brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, it's buzzwords for sure. I think, the pitch is that My career more than my life. Oh no, actually my life too. I always say, I actually was just having this conversation with some UH alums yesterday. It can get summed up as that it's opportunistic and fortuitous. And as a result of that, it really, what drives me is that I think every day amazing opportunities pass us by. And a lot of times we all understandably, and most of the time, many times for me, our heads are down. We're doing whatever we're supposed to do. Again, personal life, business life, whatever. But if you just tilt your head up and you start to see things and be willing to sort of reach out and grab them, that's kind of how my life has gone from, which we'll come back to, being at St. Lawrence and seeing the Kenya semester program and doing that as a 21-year-old semester abroad, to different startups, to a wide range. And, people try to say, I think I can't be put in a box. Like, the hard part is people are like, oh, if you're ever to look for something new, what would it be? And I'm like, I can't tell you. If you're an accountant, that's a pretty easy track. Yep, I want to be an accountant. I want to be a controller. I want to be a CFO. That's a very sort of straight line. I'm motivated by having impact. I'm motivated by making it feel good. And I love building things. So in the scheme of things, what I've learned is that just going along isn't as enjoyable for me as building something or helping someone build something. So
yeah,
that's more than 15 seconds. I'm hoping the elevator stopped a lot
no,
on the way up.
We're stuck on the 7th floor,
yeah,
and you're on a podcast for the next 53 minutes. So you have a captive audience, and I'm so excited to get deeper into it. I want to first talk about your time as the director of the Entrepreneurship Center, right? I mean, I feel like from what I know about your tenure there, from personal experience and all the people that I've interacted with and met there, you may not know this, and you're going to defer this comment. You are a revered mentor by so many people. Universally, the reaction when anyone who knows you hears the words, especially if they're a student, Ian Grant, I tell everyone, oh, you have an idea, go to the Entrepreneurship Center. Like, there's this guy there and he is unbelievable. And he's going to make you, he's going to take all the things about your idea or whatever thing you're thinking of doing that stress you out, that make you feel anxious, that make you feel like you have no idea what you're doing, and he's going to make you feel like you're on top of the world. This is the effect that you have on people, but especially students. You must have helped students launch, hundreds of ventures, hundreds of businesses, ideas. So tell me the story. How did that whole thing happen?
Yeah. So again, fortuitous. So, my own career, which we can, if we have time, we can go into later, but I did do 3 of my own startups. 2 of them were bootstrapped or self-funded and acquired. And I vowed never to bootstrap a company. And then I raised some venture capital and started a company and got caught up in the first internet bubble burst, but was fortunate enough to have had that company acquired by a Global 500 company and stay with them. And that's what was actually the catalyst to move to New Hampshire from Boston after 9/11. I just was looking and it was at a job, and a friend of a friend said, hey, UNH is opening up an entrepreneurship center. You should take a look at the job description. And I read it, and again, this is this flash moment. It's just the repeat in my life. There was a gut feeling that said yes. Not a lot of pros and cons, not writing out the sheet of paper, yes, and it was like, absolutely.
Right.
So I put it together, and obviously having done startups, I did grow up in an academic environment. My dad was a biologist at Williams College, so I was familiar with it, but most of my entire life till I got to UNH was really non-academic. And just kind of put together the pitch. And I think the expectations were relatively low in hindsight. I don't mean that in a boastful way, but I was told to slow down. Like, we kept building programs that fit the needs of students. And every time I would see a need, we'd figure it out. We had amazing donors from UNH and non-UNH who helped fund these ideas. And then the impacts kind of rolled off on their own. So very fortunate, and honestly, one of, if not the most favorite job I ever had, and far exceeded my expectations of going in, was how it made me feel, right? So it wasn't about the money. There was no equity. There was no acquisition on the backside.
A share in a public university.
Yeah, exactly. Which we all go there.
Yeah.
But, what came out of it was the ability to help people. And I think that, a couple of things that with time to reflect, but even during the moment, love my dad to death, but he was sort of a true academic, kind of, I'm the professor and you're the student.
Right.
Like I've never been that. To me, students are at a peer level, right? So, and I was never one to say good idea, bad idea. First of all, I don't have that capability. I might have an instinct,
Right.
but we flip the script to always talk about customer discovery, right? And let the market tell any prospective entrepreneur, good idea, bad idea. First of all, that takes me out of that position, because if I said it was a bad idea and it turns out that it was a bad idea, the next amazing idea you have, you probably wouldn't come back to me because you'd be like, oh, Ian's the squasher.
Right.
It's really just treating people as people, students as people. I don't even call them students, right? So obviously become, like you, a lot of really good friends who I continually text with, even as alums and even some of the undergrads and grads who are still there. So very, very fortunate.
Yeah. It would be very easy for someone with, your career, your level of success, in venture capital and serial entrepreneurship and all these things to come into an environment like that and have this attitude towards 18-year-old kids and be like, you have this idea? Well, you have no idea because I'm, a bigwig so-and-so and sold a company and you don't know anything. And, instead you take this attitude of they're students, but you're a student too. You have things to learn from them. I love what you're saying about, you reject the framing of, good idea, bad idea. Instead, what you try and impart to them is, look, I can't tell you if this is a good idea or a bad idea, but what I can teach you is, the methods and ways to figure out if this is a productive way to solve the problem you're trying to solve, if this is you're framing the issue in the right way. That's all stuff that, can be taught, and that's, entrepreneurship and all these things. It's actually this man, it's all coming back now. You'll appreciate this story. So even this podcast, which obviously is going to be a massively successful venture. My wife Jess, who's great, you remember, she was like the brains behind the whole bee thing. Oh man, we don't even have time to get into the bee thing, but she helped me, and by help me I mean did the entire thing. I asked her to design a logo for this podcast, and it's great. The idea is supposed to be, well, actually, I'm not even going to tell you.
Customer discovery.
I'm not even going to tell you. This is going to be a perfect. This might be a little bit brutal because she's going to get to hear. What do you think that this image is?
It's the old man in the mountain giving a thumbs up. My Africa bias says it's Kilimanjaro, but that must be Mount Washington, and then a forest on the top.
That's incredible. You nailed it. That makes me so happy, actually. So that is what.
Plus the old man in the mountain's wearing cool sunglasses.
Yes, he is.
This is a really cool podcast.
That's
so
right.
It's all coming together.
That's right. That is supposed to be. So I asked her. I said, I think it'd be so funny if the logo was, the old man with sunglasses giving a thumbs up, smiling or something, right? And she drew that, and I think it came out great. But I showed it to my parents last night, and I did your old lesson. You remember there was this book that you and Mark Saddam, who's another great guy, had us read called The Mom Test. And I'm going to butcher the synopsis, but the idea is like if you have an idea that you want authentic feedback on, right? You can't ask your mom because she's going to say, "Oh, I think this is great," and that's my mom to a T. Like she's so supportive that I know if I want the truth, I can't go to her, but she's great. So I showed them the picture last night, and I say, "What is this image to you?" And luckily, their reaction wasn't recorded on the pod because it might break my wife's heart. But you nailed it, and that's really great, and it's going to make Jess happy. So that was a little mom test throwback from the past. But this is an example of a really great. It might seem painful at first, counterintuitive of like to get real feedback on your idea. You really can't explain to people what it's supposed to be. Right? They have to just be exposed to it and figure out for themselves, is this actually useful or not? What was one of the hardest things that you maybe felt was difficult for students to learn in your time at the Entrepreneurship Center? Was it like just taking the leap, believing in themselves, or?
No, that's why I think almost everyone, and obviously later on, because it's amazing how in New Hampshire particularly, but throughout, high schools are really starting to develop, innovation programs. So there's a lot of wind at the back of a certain number of students coming in, but not all of them. To me, honestly, you're like one of the poster children of it. It's, we were intentional to make sure that we were accessible to everyone on campus and that we weren't academic. So this wasn't tied, it wasn't required. So students came to us because they had some personal belief. 90% of them, brave enough to come the first time, didn't know what to expect. And so that's to be expected. If I did my first startup, which was later, that's to be expected. I think the hardest part, walking through the formula of being customer centric, customer discovery, having customers who are ultimately going to be the ones that buy it, in quotes, depending upon what type of product or service it is, that's a process. That's hard. It's hard to get used to those rejections. I think the biggest part, and again, really understandable, was sort of the financials. So I think if there was one thing over the 7.5 years that I ran the Entrepreneurship Center, was that was hard. And even those students that came out of the business school that had a finance background, it's not the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I think, for me, the constant challenge was how to simplify that process and not make it overwhelming. I think I mentioned before we hopped on the podcast, I'm working with my fiance now on a nonprofit startup, and it's the same thing, like talking about the problem and the solution and et cetera, et cetera. And then there's the financials, and she's like, "Wait, well, what is this? What is EBITDA? What I don't understand." Right. So I think for a vast number of people, and maybe your listeners, that is really outside our day-to-day lives. And in the startup piece, it is probably the most difficult piece to get your head around.
When you say it's hard for students to wrap their mind around the financials, you mean like the idea that there has to be figuring out what a revenue stream has to be, or trying to monetize something, or
yeah, I think students generally understand that you can't just build it, have somebody fund it, and it loses money every day, even though there are multiple examples of that in the real world. I think really it's probably the next level down, which is how do you put together an Excel spreadsheet?
Oh, okay.
What are the line items and salary escalations general administrative costs and, all those things. For me, you can see a complicated spreadsheet and that's really overwhelming. How do you kind of narrow that down to be useful and purposeful and directional to say, yeah, this is your baseline cost. It costs X dollars to host your website. You're going to have to market it. There are certain costs you have. Where do you start to get revenue to start to at least break even? And then what do you do to get to that break even point? And is someone going to invest in the company to do it? Or can you just make money off the top, blah, 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 like a lot of different scenarios, but really sort of getting into the nitty gritty. I mean, it's all hard. You've lived it. It's all hard. But I think the number one part that I think, and again, I don't limit it just to students. Most entrepreneurs, the harder part is just really nailing down those financials, because it's so much of it is I don't know. I'm just starting today. I have no idea what the actual price is and how many units are going to be sold. And so try to explain that it's a process, and sometimes you do it both ways. You look at, well, how many units do you have to sell to get to break even?
Yeah.
And then do the gut check, I can sell 10 jackets and break even. Okay, I feel good about that. I have to sell 1 million jackets to break even.
Right.
Maybe there's something wrong with this. And so, again, more time to be spent there, but that's the hardest part.
Yeah, for me, this was a hard thing to wrap my head around or kind of change my opinion on, but it ended up being one of probably the best lesson that you ever taught me. Right. I think some students, they come into whatever the college environment or the academic environment or, the entrepreneurship world, and, they have an idea, particularly in kind of the social entrepreneurship space of, they want to do something good or that they think makes the world a better place. And it can be hard to square, the mission with, asking for money, right, for the thing or selling a thing, because it's hard to get over the baggage of, oh, well, if I'm doing something for money, it means
it's evil.
It's evil or soulless, right? And And you helped me understand that, sure, you can point to examples of that being true for lots of things. So often of the time, it's if you want a thing to be real, money is just an avenue to make it real. I love your perspective in the way that you've imparted kind of that lesson to so many students and myself, and it was a really like game-changing thing to kind of appreciate, right? And even just something as simple as figuring out, the price of something. What should the price be? It's like, well, what will people pay? And that sounds cynical at first, of like, well, we should charge as much as possible, and maybe sometimes you should, maybe sometimes you shouldn't. But it's this idea of the value of a thing kind of being an open question, and then it giving you more flexibility on the business end to like do more stuff, hire more people, create, more jobs, or whatever your goal is, right? Like it really is a different kind of value set to bring. That is what you made me understand and appreciate about entrepreneurship, is that it is spaghetti on the wall all the time. And it's actually better that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that was such I can't even tell you how many, you must have endless examples of, but just, of people I know or stories I've heard of, you think that everything that is around you, whether it's a business or a thing, that it was a perfect thought out plan. And
it's not, and rarely does it continue. And those that actually continue to be solid and rigid or tend to be the ones that then collapse because they're not looking at the changes in the world or competition or whatever. It is the natural. And I think you have to sort of get used to that. It's kind of like the motion of the ocean. Like you got to just understand that is the rhythm.
Right.
And once you don't fight it, then it's a lot easier.
Yeah. Let's talk about the motion of the ocean of Ian Grant. Could you talk to me a little bit about what you do now, how you transition away from the Entrepreneurship Center, or even, if you want to talk about some of the startups that you did, like, I want to hear all the stories of pivoting or things you didn't expect. Like,
yeah, so pivoted, a lot. Again, it comes back to sort of opportunistic and fortuitousness. I had this adage, and again, I can't remember when it started, but it seems like since I was a kid, which is sort of this toolbox theory. And that is, we go through life and we have experiences and we meet people, and those experiences, good, bad, ugly, fantastic, all of them are a different tool that we put in our toolbox. And I just found personally, like, I never knew when I would use that tool again in experience a month later, 10 years later. But sure enough, I feel like I have used those tools at different times. And so I think that approach and adage for me has worked really well, which is like, it's okay. You don't quite understand the reason why you have this tool or what is happening, but put it, and then, be cognizant enough to be able to realize and use that tool later for the betterment of anything, right? Yeah. Yourself, other people, or, to share that. So, for me, I'm a firm believer that, leadership change is good. So after 7.5 years of really launching what was nothing when I got to UNH, the Entrepreneurship Center, or the E-Center, a really good friend of mine. So when I was a junior in college at St. Lawrence University, they had an abroad studies program in Kenya. In that story, which I'll do a little sidetrack, but it's representative of what I've been talking about. So my dad was a college professor, so we lived in Oxford for a year on a sabbatical. We lived in Edinburgh for a year sabbatical. In my head, it was always like, I'll just do the London program and kind of be like this personal growth all within the UK. And I remember sitting in the auditorium at St. Lawrence, and they had at that time a slideshow and I'm like, that's it. Again, no pros and cons. Like, it was a gut reaction, and ultimately it was like, that's an amazing experience that I can't replicate. I can replicate living back in the UK, but to live in Kenya with Kenyans, understand a developing country, all those things. And this was back in 1983. and so just forever changed my life. To me, it was the number one takeaway from my education at St. Lawrence. And continued to be involved. Would go back every 3 to 5 years. My dad ultimately started coming and leading safari groups with Williams alums. I took a sabbatical. I lived with the Maasai. I speak Swahili. I traveled overland from Cape Town, all the way up the Indian Ocean side. Was at the border of Rwanda. They had just closed the border during the genocide. Back then, no cell phones, no communications. We didn't know why. We had to turn around. Had we been there a week earlier, we would have been right in Kigali, right in the middle of all that.
Wow.
So always a special place. And my kids have been there twice. We actually spread some of my dad's ashes there. Like, it's just an amazing place.
Yeah.
So a good friend of mine who was on the program with me reached out and said, hey, she's at the African Wildlife Foundation, which is a great organization. 300 people, based in Kenya, African-led, $30 million budget. She goes, we need somebody who has a business perspective, has innovation, and who has raised money. Like, is there any way I can convince you to come over?
Sure.
And always, like, this is one of these floating things that have always been in my head, which is like, how do I pay it back, right? How do I somehow pay back for this eye-opening, emotional, huge, impactful personal connection to the continent? And I was like, this is the time. Like, I don't know if it's going to be any better. I didn't have to move to Kenya. I didn't have to move away from my kids and my structure here.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm in, And so again, that whole process took maybe 2 months, right? And most of that was just doing HR interviews.
Yeah.
But it was a fait accompli. And I told St. Lawrence that I gave them 2 months. Like, I want this to be a smooth transition. East Center's my baby. I want to make sure it continues. Don't screw it up.
Right.
And so now I work for African Wildlife Foundation. Very different, completely different. Actually on my way to Kenya and Ethiopia at the end of May with a donor. So most of my time is spent fundraising, very large donors. And it's great being able to meet with them. And it's not dissimilar to this, right?
Yeah.
Having conversations. There's something about Africa for people who have gone to the continent. So whatever country, Botswana or Kenya or Tanzania, Ethiopia, wherever, like, there is this emotional pull.
Yeah.
There's a human pull. And people love sharing that with people who know it. So, that's a great part. Other parts, it's again, I'm further back on the bus, right? I'm not driving the bus. And that has, there's good aspects to that. And then there's frustration because I also love to drive the bus, obviously. So,
right.
But a great organization. And for me, it was a way to pay it back.
Sure. Oh my God. I didn't know a lot of that stuff about you. You just get more interesting and the whole
there's a
picture.
lot. It's just this, again, if you see it. I grew up on a horse farm. I competed in the Junior Olympics, and I attribute the hard work to waking up at 4:30 in the morning and sloshing water buckets from the back of the house in the winter, splashing on my leg, and shoveling manure and haying in 110-degree weather. Like, that's where the hard work ethic, that's the tool in the toolbox. Like, that's what I can draw back on to say, that was what it was. And a heartbreak of horses going lame at just before a prime competition. And how do you dig deep and plow through and be an optimist to say, it's okay. And in fact, the horse that I brought to the junior games, he had this injury. The vet said, you'll never be able to ride him again, let alone compete. Well, we took time, and again, there's some lucky to it, and took 2 years, healed him, and that's the horse that I rode, right? So that's sort of where that optimism comes from, is just believing. It doesn't always work out, but then there's something else. So,
what was the horse's name?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
It's called the Strider.
No kidding.
Yep.
Because of Lord of the Rings?
Lord of the Rings. So when, as kids, and then again, great visual. So we both have been talking about our parents. So again, I was probably, 6, 7 years old. Every night my sister and I would sit on the couch with my dad, and he would read Lord of the Rings. And there was just something about the Strider that was captivating.
Yeah.
In fact, when I saw the movie, like I swear, like they had reached into my brain and taken out that film in my brain of me visualizing what my dad read, because it was like so similar. But anyway, so that was, the Strider came from there. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yep. Got a lot of personal stuff coming out on this.
No, it's
great. I have my open books.
It's fantastic. There is so much to love there. Tolkien, I feel like, has this effect on a lot of people. You know, he can bring, like, who doesn't love the Shire?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Who doesn't love the
Who
Shire?
doesn't want to live in the Shire?
Right. And you know, what is the Shire, right? And like, what does it mean? And people, I mean, we joke in my family, we refer to New Hampshire as the Shire. Mm-hmm. My wife and I bought a farm last summer. It's the extension of, in a way, what we were doing with the bees. A little context, we could have a whole conversation about that. But my wife, Jess, and I used to be professional beekeepers, and we ended up doing that because of our participation in the Social Venture Innovation Challenge, and Ian helped us, you know, do that and make it a real thing. And, you know, we didn't end up sticking with it, but we always loved being outdoors and doing homesteading kind of stuff and always wanted to return to that. And, you know, here we are having, you know, 8-acre farm up in Tamworth, New Hampshire.
Oh, that's awesome.
You know, but it makes me feel like I'm just now starting to appreciate all those hard work farming lessons that you would have learned when you were 7, you know, shoveling the manure and, you know, waking up early and all that stuff. So it's, you know, I can relate to that. Of course, I'm an adult man. I love how all this stuff must connect for you in your head. For me, one of the great things about Tolkien is that fundamentally, you know, The Lord of the Rings is about regular people continuing on and doing small things to make the world a better place. And, you know, there's nothing special about Frodo, but he's given this grand quest. He just embraces it and he goes and does it. And then I'm just a normal hobbit. That as like a theme of the darkness and the pressure will always be extraordinary. You know, maybe it always has been, but there is a light in the Shire and in home and in your roots and just doing the thing. Like, I don't know. What does The Lord of the Rings mean to you? You know, that's what it means to me. Do you?
Yeah, no, actually for you to be so eloquent and say it that way, it's like, yes, like maybe actually a lot of all this aspects, that's where it was born, was sitting on the couch having it read to me. No, for sure. It's an adventure. It is this humbleness and sort of a sense of duty. And now you sort of think about it, I'm like what I do, I don't believe is a sense of duty. Like
Right.
Working for UNH, it was a way to give back for my entrepreneurial success and the lessons. And again, I feel that I got 100x. If you think you took things away, I feel I got 100x back
Sure.
from the students and the enthusiasm and that vision. So, and AWF, it's, you know, for me, maybe it's just that notion of, yeah, you just do the right thing. And I think ultimately a lot of success can be if you can figure out, and I had a mentor years ago that said, you know, figure out how to check your ego at the door.
Right.
You know, and at UNH, you know, with students, I definitely did that. You have to have an ego to drive and to create a vision and to, you know, politically make hay with it. But internally, it was like, it was never about me, right? It's about you that had never thought about, you know, had this vicious feeling about business as Mordor. And you know, to help shape that. So I think that there's an element of there. And I never really thought that until now. So thanks for bringing that to light.
Yeah. There's a great picture of you when you got your role at the foundation where, you know, you're in college. It must have been around that time or just after
Yep.
college. And, you know, what is it's like you're standing in front of you're in Africa in this image. Yeah,
I'm assuming it's one where I'm with probably Samurai Warrior,
Yeah.
where I have a big beard. And
Yeah. You look exactly the same. To quote, we're going to quote Gandalf, so you haven't aged a day.
Yeah, except for I have the color of Gandalf's hair, so I have.
But you have all his other positive qualities in that you're a wizard who can summon the best of humankind's
Yes.
will and innovation to solve hard problems that seem impossible. You're a very Gandalf figure. I hope that's a flattering.
It is.
Gandalf happens to be like 6,000 years old, but
I don't see that, but I appreciate it. So thank you for the compliment. It's, you know, it's all about putting mirrors up and letting people see themselves and to help them be successful. Ultimately, like that's the dream. If I could help every student or anyone, again, be a better person and help themselves, like that's a win. Like it doesn't, that means more than a $10 million IPO. Like,
right.
It's just, that's what, you know, I think ultimately, and you know, the other sort of I guess it's mentor, but its mentor from reading was Henry David Thoreau.
Yeah.
So my sophomore and junior year in high school, I just really got into Walden Pond. And I think I even put in my yearbook, like, sink your feet down through the mud until you hit bedrock. That's reality. And again, that captivated. And again, I think about that now is like, there's all sorts of mush and garbage and interference around us. But if we're conscious just to really understand what reality is, then that's a great place to be from.
Yeah.
And it's probably even more so now with the advent of social media and now AI and not knowing what to believe and to believe that, we all have to, each of us have to find what that bedrock is.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, there's a silly expression that, makes its way around the internet sometimes. Have you heard this? People say touch grass. Sometimes people, if the joke is, if you spend too much time on social media or the internet or something, someone will just say, go and touch grass,
Right. Yeah.
Like get outside, get off your screen and, reground yourself into a thing that's, real, or feels more real than, whatever's on the screen or whatnot. Right. A great favorite saying not of mine, but of someone, I think Steve Jobs or something, man, you can't connect the dots of your life looking forward, right? You can only do it looking backwards, retroactively. And I feel like your work at the foundation must feel like one of those times where it must have just felt like this moment for you where you said, you don't understand. Like I've been preparing for this my entire life,
right.
But that's not an opportunity that you ever probably foresaw.
No, but this comes back to, so you're absolutely, dead on. And I'll say two things. One is it was, our life is a puzzle.
Right.
And it was just that section of the puzzle that we don't know where that piece is, right? It's still in the box. It's on the floor. You'll find it eventually. It's just not there. But this comes to the point where I was saying everyday opportunities pass us. And the question is our head down or are our eyes up?
Yeah.
And my feeling is if our eyes are up and we know we have this subconscious or conscious list of things that we want, when that opportunity comes by, you can snag it because your eyes and your awareness are like, yeah, that's been a missing thing. Even when I did my sabbatical I was in commercial real estate in Boston, I was the first one in 25 years to do a sabbatical, went back to Africa. And, when I was there, I was like trying to figure out how could I do business, how could I marry the business side to Africa? And,
right.
Looked at all sorts of, and it was just, it's 8,000 miles away. It just doesn't really work to the US. It's better for Europe. But anyway, so I tried, there were several times over my tenure that I was trying to find it, maybe trying too hard, but, being aware and conscious. And so when this came along, yeah, does it check all the boxes? No, but nothing checks all the boxes in
right.
life. If you do, you should be suspicious.
Yeah.
It's called malware. But this was as close as it could be, and it's giving back in a different way. So, that's good. I feel like that's great. The puzzle's there. I have other holes in the puzzle that will, I'm sure, somewhere in the future at some time that I can't even tell you sitting here today when
right.
that would happen. Could be tomorrow, could be in 10 years.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, it's never ending. That's
right.
That's kind of the beauty of, I think, your worldview is it's all entrepreneurship all the time.
Yes.
Life is
problem solving,
right?
Attitude,
yeah,
and belief,
and falling in love with the process. All those things, that's kind of the real. I don't think that you said as much. You don't look at your success as a mentor to hundreds of students and entrepreneurs and whatnot as. I've never heard. You could. I'm sure it's wicked impressive on paper. You could quantify that as, the cumulative market value of all the startups that I helped advise and launch is, probably something quite impressive. But you don't think of it like that. Not that that's not a valuable metric, but you think of it as I helped a bunch of people see a more capable, hopeful version of themselves and of the world. And that is invaluable.
Absolutely. Again,
said.
That's the toolbox, right? So the tool that you got for a half acre,
yeah,
right? Again, for me and my peers at other entrepreneurship centers may differ in the school. The goal is never to help students. the final goal is never to help students launch a startup. If that happens to be a byproduct along the way, fantastic. If that startup is amazingly successful, fantastic. I hope you remember UNH helped you.
Yeah.
But that's never the goal. And in fact, in most universities, that isn't, right? It's this notion of creating the entrepreneurial mindset, right? So it's that invaluable tool that will give you the confidence to do a podcast, that will give you confidence to have a couple of career
Arrogance,
shifts.
perhaps. Yeah.
You know, that's the idea of it, is that it's all about building confidence and belief in yourself that you can do things that you didn't think you could do. You know, in athletics, right? You know, a really good coach. And in my athletic career, I had an amazing coach, completely changed my approach and way to think about for competing. Like, that was a reusable tool. These are reusable tools for all. And to me, like, that is the satisfaction of satisfactions.
Yeah. All right. Conservation and environmentalism is a passion for you. How do you make that pitch to people? You are as successful as anyone could stand to describe themselves as, you know, in every way. And you're here in your job talking to big donors about funding wildlife conservation, right? A serial venture capitalist. Tell me about that. How do you help people see the value in the work? Maybe tell me a little bit about the work.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, some of this, I'll just be borrowing some of the pitch that we use.
Sure.
You know, ultimately, you know, Africa's a giant continent, right? So 90% of the people that we speak with already have a passion for it. May not have all gone, but have a passion for it, have a passion for elephants. And obviously during the worst days of ivory and the slaughter of elephants for ivory, you know, that really got on people's consciousness. So it's a little bit of a subset. It's probably different than driving in New Hampshire and saying, well, this isn't going to last forever if we're not careful and thoughtful. So it's already a little bit of a subset of a circle. But that being said, and AWF, and one of the reasons I joined, again, it's African-based, it's African-led, and the premise is, like, ultimately, this is Africa's issue. Right. These are the people. And so the pitch is, it's sort of this three-pronged approach. And that is, if you believe in wanting to conserve wildlife and the importance of all of that, and that means, by definition, you also have to support preserving the wild lands. We call it wildlands, right? So the land of which those animals live. And if you are concerned and really buy into having to preserve that land, then you also have to appreciate that there are people. So for me, and I saw it firsthand when I lived with the Maasai in Kenya, like, there's no strict line between the game park and where they live. So you have to understand that there are people that also live and survive on that land. And so what's the strategy to do that so that it's a win-win for everyone?
Yeah.
And so, you know, our approach is, one's about supporting leadership, so both at the high end, making sure that governments are on board, and underneath. So it's something like Africa's population, like 70% of Africa's population is under 35 years old.
Yeah.
So you think about that bulge and that wave and the pressure that's going to have. Those that live, the indigenous people that live in and around those parks, I don't care if it's in Rwanda or Tanzania or Botswana or Cameroon or wherever we are, they have to be partners.
Right.
And so how do we think about this? Is sort of where the innovative sort of entrepreneurial come. Like, how do we engage them to be thoughtful stewards, and that they're not the outcast, but they're actually part of the solution? Yeah. So in painting that for donors, they really start to understand that. I think in general, not everyone in the United States, not everyone in the world cares about elephants, and clearly not, because in Asia, you know, rhino horn and elephants' tusks are used for, you know, fictitious, you know, benefits. But go to the masses and that support. So people are inclined, but you just have to tell the story and the strategy around it to get them to say, I get it. And then it's like anything. Again, it's like a startup. you have to show success, right? So you see this more and more now in all nonprofits, is that, a while ago now, the notion of a donor writing a check and saying, and the organization saying, trust us.
Right.
No, there's an accountability. There's a reporting back. It's not going to always go swimmingly well. You have to own that. What did we do wrong? What can we change? But ultimately, you need to track towards having success in order for that to be a self-fulfilling prophecy of more funding coming, because people want to support success, right?
Yeah.
And so that, I think, learning to tell that story, we happen to do it from an African Voices standpoint, tell the story of those impacts is critical.
Yeah. I would love to hear what of the Maasai people taught you about, entrepreneurship, right? Or like or creative problem solving, or, even just like their relationship to the land and all these things. Like, I want to hear a little bit about the people. I mean, you lived with these people, and clearly
that
have
could be
respect
that
for
could
them.
be a podcast unto itself. Yeah. So, amazing people. One of the you mentioned that, triggered a story, and I'll come back to this last question. But when we were living with the Maasai, this is 1993. We were in this village, and the Maasai live in these cow dung huts. They're probably 6 foot tall. You kind of have to stoop in. You go in, and it's always dark. They have a fire inside. It's always welcoming for chai, which is tea. And again, it's the middle of nowhere. It's really hot. It's really dusty, and so like 6 or 8 months before, there had been a volunteer there from Vermont. And you're in these villages, the kids, their eyes are all running, it's conjunctivitis and whatever. And it's all because you go into the Maasai hut, and it's like really smoky. Like, it's dark, it's hard, right? So this volunteer was like, oh, well, in Vermont, we have chimneys. So we went around to each of these huts, poked a hole in the roof, little chimney stack, smoke went out. Kids' eyes cleared up,
right?
And the volunteer, went back to Vermont or wherever, and it felt like, he had done this amazing feat.
Sure.
Well, when we get there, the Ministry of the Health is there because they can't figure out why in this little village there's been this spike of malaria.
Oh, gee. Yeah.
So it turns out, to your point,
right,
for thousands of years, they figured it out. So yes, the kids' eyes were runny because of the smoke, but at night, the smoke kept the mosquitoes away.
Yeah.
And so therefore, the kids didn't get bitten and they didn't get malaria. So we come in very purposeful, very well-intentioned, but you gotta go with the rhythm. And the Maasai have changed now. They have been forced to sort of have, it used to be very big communal land. So they're pastoralists, they would follow the rain. So they're herders, right? So there's cows and goats, and they live and die, probably literally, based upon the ability to find grasslands for their animals to eat, their livestock to eat. So there used to be where, you'd leave one area and you'd have to go, and the elders would say, this is where we're going this year. Now, it would take them a while to get there. And if they were wrong and there were no rains, then that was it. Like, they wouldn't have time to. But obviously, year after year, decade after decade, century after century, they were successful.
Yeah.
And Western meteorologists could never figure out,
right,
how did they know?
Yeah.
And again, I think it's always been sort of ingrained in me that, like, that this is their land. They understand the rhythms of it. They survive on it more than we do.
Right.
Arguably, in many ways. And that you have to believe. So quick to say, oh my God, they're so primitive. And you look at them, yes, they're in red robes and they live in cow dung huts. And yes, so at that, from a visual standpoint, yes, compared to this building.
Yeah, there's not
absolutely.
a Walmart.
But that doesn't translate that they don't know how to survive and live in their environment. So I think, there's something in that for me, sort of from an entrepreneur standpoint to your question, like, you just have to trust that the customer knows what they need and what works for them, and to be able to do that. And I think just, some of it was just self-awareness. I think that, people always said the first time when I was, again, a junior in college, people were like, oh my gosh, like, how was the culture shock? And I'm like, actually, the culture shock wasn't going.
Yeah.
the culture shock was coming back. So in 1983, it was far, the supermarket had, a choice of 2 toothpastes and 4 cereals. And then I would come back and go to the equivalent of Shaw's and be like 50 toothpaste and be like, wait, why do we need that many toothpastes? Why do we need that many cereals? So, that was really the harder part, is that transition back. And again, it's a tool for the toolbox and you adapt, but appreciate it.
Yeah. There's always something to learn,
Yes.
from people. And that's a lesson that you just shared, right? Is that we might use the word entrepreneurship for, this method of solving and, sustaining solutions to problems, right? But like really it's just ingenuity, like
survival.
Yeah, survival, innovation, right?
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of, I don't know, this attitude of, most people are actually pretty smart. They have lived their lives and their circumstances, and they've like figured out a way to succeed in them, and they have something to teach you, right? Like you go and it would have been the wrong attitude to show up and be like, well, the Messiah, where's the Walmart?
Right.
Like,
right. Well, they're a Messiah that we lived with. So we were probably 2.5 hours away from the capital city of Nairobi. They hadn't been more than probably 20-mile radius from their village.
Wow.
Primarily women, right? So this, it's again upside down, particularly in our world. But the Maasai women do most of the work.
Right.
So we would go out, we'd fetch water, we'd pick up sticks for fires, but they had never left. And in some ways, their happiness factor was again 1,000x.
Right.
They weren't tempted by what they don't have.
Yeah.
They were appreciative and balanced with what they had. So, and to your other question, I remember one of my best mentors, he was the director, Paul Robinson, of the St. Lawrence program when I was there. And, he was like, you have to take the experience, right? You can't hold it. They want to grow. They want to advance.
Right.
You can't just romanticize it, which is easy to do because I thought this is just beautiful.
Yeah.
They also have to. So we actually are taking more. They are taking awareness, but each of us are taking something away from each of these experiences to use. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're even in there. It all comes back to Tolkien. A lot of people have this kind of pastoral, idyllic fantasy vision for this idea that human beings have, I don't know, fallen from grace. Things were simpler when everyone grew their own food and all that. And I'm not saying all that is like wrong necessarily, right? But having the opportunity to interact with incredible people who, have developed complex solutions to the problems that face them, that have worked for a long, long time, and then coming to understand the impact of modernity and globalization and the pressures that face wildlife in some of the more vulnerable areas of the world. It's fascinating to think, like, to come in and say, well, what they have is pristine and, untouched. And I'm sure if like you talk to them side people, like, yeah, I mean, we want, we want some of the things that you want.
What seems new and novel, I do remember, again, as a student back then, it was Kodak film, and seeing a giraffe, like, live, like 10 yards away, click, 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 run through the 36 frames. Just couldn't believe. 2 months later, it was like driving by cows in New Hampshire. Like, oh yeah, there's giraffes. So it's funny where when you go someplace for 1 or 2 weeks, and trust me, they are magnificent and unique. But to your point, like the Messiah, like, yeah, they are the wildlife that are in and around here. We see them every day. Like, what's the big to do?
Right.
So
you don't understand. It's a giraffe.
Right.
Look at that thing. Well, I saw a comedian last summer, a Boston guy. He came to Tamworth, and he had this great joke. He didn't spend much time in New Hampshire, so he told a bunch of Boston jokes about New Hampshire people. And he said, whenever I come to a small town like this, people always think I want to see an animal, and they're always like, "You want to see a moose? You want to see a bobcat, a wild cat, a mountain lion?" And he's like, "No, I live in Boston. Like, I don't. Do you want to see an elevator? But there is kind of this fascination, with the exotic, and there's ways of appreciating that, that doesn't feel like cheap or exploitative, right? Like, you're not going around telling people like, oh, the Maasai are these perfect people who are uncorrupted and all. They're like, no, they are complex and as human as you and I, and they're really not
They're
so
impressive.
different.
They have flaws. They just live in a different place with different values. And, I've always thought that, for me, again, even though I had been overseas and lived overseas as a kid, looking back at the U.S. was really healthy. And to me, like if it was a way for every American to spend time overseas and look back at the U.S. and understand, I think it's just healthier just from an awareness. Maybe your opinions don't change, but at least you have an awareness and understanding. And being, I remember being in Nairobi and reading the International Herald Tribune at the time about a story that went on. And I was right there. And I'm like, this is really not what happened.
Right.
And getting that check and balance on what that looks like. I just think it's, that's a really healthy place to come from.
Yeah. My sister works in publishing, and she tells me that, a common joke about, whenever they publish a book about Africa, they all have the same.
It's the country of Africa. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The country of Africa, and they all have the same cover. It's, the savannah at sunset with like a lone tree in the middle of it. And it's like, oh, this is Africa. Right. And of course, the reality is Africa is like maybe the most diverse, like there's more diversity, right? Yes. Culturally and in a smaller radius, and the countries are huge. Do you feel like that's changed over time, or do you feel like you're
well, in my world,
perceptions?
I think there's generally an awareness of it. Day-to-day conversations, I just think it's a lack of exposure. Yeah. I think the Western media sometimes could do more. Like they've done a better job, but they could do more to try to help illustrate that. And again, some of it's, you watch the big cats on BBC and you watch some of it is what's the window that a person has into it. And so that's what frames it, right? So how else, unless you're really curious and start to do, a lot of your own research. Like I don't completely knock people for not understanding the complete diversity. I do knock people for being like, okay, the continent, I forget, I should actually know this. It's something like 11 United States.
Right.
Is the continent.
Yeah, the map distorts its size.
Kenya itself is the size of Texas, right? So just do the math. So I think it's good. I think it triggers a different thought, but this awareness and appreciativeness, I think. So again, I was there in '83, and we kept meeting these kids who were, probably our age. And their Anglo-Saxon name was Kennedy, right? So they have their mother tongue name, but a lot of times they have an English name. They all were Kennedy. Sorry. And it turned out that in 1961, there had been a horrendous drought. And President Kennedy had the U.S. send bags of grain, which basically kept these families alive.
Yeah.
And the way they showed appreciation was to name their next born son, typically born in 1962.
Right.
Kennedy.
Yeah.
So you could always, when you met, a kid named Kennedy, you pretty knew he was born in 1962.
Right.
But, to me, like what a very, there's, people don't always like to give foreign aid. They don't think people appreciate it. And to me, this was like just one microcosm of a story that says like, you have no idea how much impact that had for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm sure there's some conspiracy theory that could go around for that. But in general, it was just, to me, just a really neat insight about how thoughtful and appreciative these people were.
Right.
For, a relatively small gesture.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's a question. You said your kids have been to Kenya?
One thing, so, we moved to Boston ostensibly after 9/11, right? It was for like a lot of people sort of a quality of life check, like what are we doing? Where are we? I was in the Prudential Tower at the time with I just sold my startup to this company, and we're like, is this really where we want? The kids were kindergarten and, younger. So parachuted in. Didn't know anybody here.
Yeah.
We have family roots in Hopkinton. My family was one of the original founders of Hopkinton, several hundred years ago. So was aware of it, and we parachuted in. Love it. Great quality of life. People are people. Billionaire, don't have two pennies rubbed together. People are people, and they
Right.
generally, it was such a refreshing difference from Boston, where the first question is, where'd you go to school?
Yeah.
What do you do? How much do you make? Like here, it was people. It was just like a more natural way to live. The only downside, and it's better now, but it's still not great, is that it's white bread, right?
Right.
The lack of diversity is significant, particularly compared to Boston.
Yeah.
So we had Kenyan friends. I always came to the house, Maasai friends, and one's now actually in the Senate in Kenya, minority leader.
Wow.
I knew him as a Maasai kid. Like, it's just cool to see his journey. But so
He's
our
not
kids
named
were
Kennedy, is he?
no, actually he's not.
You could say I have a political. I'm from a political family.
I'm a
Scion.
dynasty.
Yeah.
But for our kids, like, they saw it, and we realized that I forget the expression. Either you go to the mountain or you bring the mountain to you, or whatever.
Yeah.
So we were purposeful to say we can bring, that exposure of primarily Kenyans, to our kids, so that and for them it was, everything, or you also expose them to it. So,
Right.
Their mom and I firmly believed in that. So they were in 4th grade and 2nd grade for the first trip, and for them, it really stretched the envelope. I think that's the other life lesson for me, is that it's all about stretching envelopes. So whether it's in the e-center, and for my kids on this trip, like, it definitely stretched their envelopes. Like, my daughter was 2nd grade, long blonde hair. Like, they were just fascinated touching her hair, and she was pretty shy at the time. But ultimately, she now has become this big adventurer, right? So that experience baked something into her, I'm going to say, her ongoing DNA,
Yeah.
that said, hey, it's okay. I stretched it. I came back and I survived, and actually I'm better for it. And same for my son. And then we went back 2 or 3 years ago to spread my dad's ashes. And for them to then see it, whatever number of years later,
Right.
it was really impactful for them. And they are both adventurous and willing to travel internationally. And I think that's a really healthy thing. And I know that they are starting to pay it back in their own way to other organizations on their own, right? And that's not something that we sat down and had the family requirements. Like, that's just something, if you see it, I think this comes back to, a lot of this idea of this amazing podcast is, like, where does that come from?
Yeah.
Right? And so I do think that it being modeled helps. Like, I can't say that my parents were amazing, but I didn't, there was not an overt amount of volunteerism in the family and whatnot. I just have seen that. But if you model it, or if you people that you respect, or you listen to a podcast and you're like, that's a good thing. And I see that a lot around the Seacoast, our families that, it can be part of the church group. It doesn't have to be part of the church group, or they're going to Haiti or the DR or Costa Rica. And I think people start to see that and understand what's possible. Like, that's a theme, right? What's possible, be curious, and start to ingrain that in the next generation, that it will pay off in large amounts.
Yeah. Yeah. The ideal of service, right? If you're not serving or giving back in some way,
Right.
What are you doing? Like, you're not, you can kind of understand Jimmy Carter's still out there.
Still building houses.
He's still building houses.
Habitat for Humanity, I know.
And what is he? He's like 95 or something now. And he doesn't have to be doing that.
No.
He wouldn't be doing it, I think, unless he really, really liked it.
Yeah.
Agreed. And this is something you understand. And it was a bit of a light bulb that, you helped flip for me. It's kind of a shame when young people are given this impression of, volunteering or serving others, and they see it as like, oh, what a drain. It takes away from my goals or this or that. And unless someone is given the opportunity to see and experience how fulfilling it can be to, like, really do something for somebody else and see the value for themselves, they often don't see it. I'm not trying to be sanctimonious, but like there is a real, it feels good to help other people. The more you do it, oftentimes it can, like success in business or entrepreneurship, like, it can become a thing that feeds on itself.
Yeah, agreed. And it just was triggering. It's like, I couldn't remember the name of its company. So another now alum, but amazing entrepreneur at the E-Center, Jack Potvin, he created this nonprofit called Project Happy. And it was geared to be embedded inside of New Hampshire high schools.
Yeah.
To help track and create these opportunities. It's, it's sort of a Match.com. You probably wouldn't like this, but
sure.
Sorry, Jack. A Match.com for nonprofit help.
Okay.
Right. So volunteerism.
Yeah.
Right. How do you create that culture? And he's done really well with it. So, again, I think he saw that as this opportunity and a need and then facilitate it. Right. So sometimes all you have to do is provide the grease. Right.
Right.
You just have to reduce the friction,
right,
to make it easier for people to do something that they might want to do, and or educate them as to why that's important.
Yeah.
But if you want to volunteer, you don't really know where to go, and maybe you don't like dogs and cats, so you don't go to the ASPCA because that's the first place you think of. Then you're stuck, and then it's like trying to get back into shape. Then, it's easy just to back out, right? So, so to me, something like Project Happy, which is New Hampshire based, that's a really neat way in high schools. And again, the younger you start, the more I think it gets into this forward DNA or whatever that would be called.
Yeah. This is something too that I bet you can appreciate, either in seeing it develop in your own kids or, seeing students change and have their own transformation in the Entrepreneurship Center, right? Well, a lot of people think that they don't have anything to offer, right? Particularly because they're young and they say, I'm 19. Like, what do I have to teach? And teenagers make the best camp counselors because they know how to wrangle, kids younger than them and vice versa. And so there's always a stage at which you can give back or help people, who know less or less experience or younger than you. Right. So, I don't know, just.
Yeah. And I'm not, this isn't about ragging on social media. Obviously it's a critical piece, but my observation has been that the self-validation and confidence building, it's faux. Yeah. But that's where students look to get that validation and confidence. Yeah. And externally, maybe it's there, 1,000 likes, whatever. It's damaging as the flip side can be, but stay on the upside. But, how do you create that true confidence that's from the inside out? And that's from doing and exploring and having an idea and having a dream and just going forward with it. Whether it's ultimately successful is almost immaterial. It's knowing that you can do it and that you want to do it is critical. And again, I sort of go back to, I think I mentioned my fiancée, Susan Hackett Johnson, works at Drape Academy. She does experiential learning. And she has the high school students there in the public high school, building boats, creating help. Like these students who, a lot of them very humble backgrounds. Talk about light bulbs going off. Right. Like they actually built something. They can see this dory floating that goes out to Wood Island, and they did that. Yeah, it's real. And you see that it just changes the trajectory. And I think that's just a key piece in general for giving back and being altruistic, is knowing that you can just change that trajectory to put anyone, any stage of their life. It really isn't about students to do something and believe in themselves and start to be curious. Ultimately, I think that's just that's a golden gift. Yeah.
And then they do it for someone else.
Yeah. Because they understand, or they've I walked in your shoes. Right. And I want to share with you my experience. Not that you have to do it, but I'm going to create the opportunity for you to be exposed to it, and then you'll take it in whatever way you want, right? It's not totally prescribed, but it definitely is. It's about opening doors and having opportunities and providing confidence and hand-holding sometimes, and a kick in the butt at other times, right? It's the full package.
Yeah. Every chance I have to talk to some 19-year-old college student, I tell them this. I'm like, networking is an intimidating sounding word. If you talk to people who you really want to talk to and who you're interested in talking to, they'll understand, just be polite and authentic. And ideally they'll introduce you to someone else. They say, oh, this was great. You should talk to so-and-so, and then they'll talk you to so-and-so. And
yeah, my experience is, and the more you open up, then obviously the more touch points there are, right? Yeah. So you already said you learn a lot more about me, today than spending 4 years with me. But, it's like, oh my gosh, well, I know someone who has a passion for Africa or did a horse farm or did
Right.
XYZ. And, I always tell my kids and others, like, ask questions. Like, people enjoy talking about themselves, right?
Yeah.
So obviously you're doing a podcast, so you're already drinking that Kool-Aid.
It's so fun.
But like that's, and people, and there's an affinity that sort of develops, and that's the critical part.
Yeah.
So, and people generally want to help other people. And if you're polite, as you said, about it, then it kind of flows on its own in most cases. And then if it doesn't, then that person's not the person
Right.
that you want to hang out with, and that's okay.
Yeah, there's 99 other people out of every country.
Yeah, exactly.
Who are probably going to be nice to you. It's funny you mentioned, what your fiance does. My first real professional ambition was to be a boat builder, actually. And for better or for worse, it was a malformed idea. I learned to play the drums when I was like 11 and got lessons, and I just had this vague vision. My parents were like, "What do you want to do?" And I was like, "Well, drumming's pretty cool, and if I could bolt a drum set to a motorboat and have someone else drive the boat, that'd be pretty fun."
I thought you were going to use the power of the pedal to drive.
Oh,
so I thought
that would be
I thought
so
you were
great.
like really going big on
Yeah, well, this is going to be our venture. I'm going to meet your fiance, and then we're going to have human muscle powered, drum powered motorboats.
Yeah.
And it's going to be
the future.
Great fundraising. Yeah,
Invest now.
Exactly. Sometimes it's just like having those crazy dumb ideas. Like, I'm going to tell a little bit of the story. This is what you did for me, Ian. I was doing the competition, and I had this bee thing, this idea of like, oh, let's do something for the honeybees. And, I will never forget a couple of days before, the final round of the presentation, and, everyone's nervous. I'm nervous, and I'm practicing the pitch with you. And you said this crazy thing to me that changed my entire life. You were like, "Hey, do you have a beekeeping suit?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do. I could get one." And you were like, "You should wear it when you present." And I'm like, "What the hell are you talking about? What do you mean? This is like everyone else is going to show up." And you're like, no, just do it. It's not in the rules that you can't wear a beekeeping suit. Like, just do it. And I was like, and I thought you were completely insane.
Which I probably was.
Yeah, which was like probably correct. But I went in on the day of the competition, and like, oh my God. I mean, it helped me turn a feeling that, I was anxious and nervous, but also, really excited to do it. And it was almost like a cheat code. Like I kind of felt bad for all the other students who were there that day, because like they all worked as hard as me, and they all showed up, dressed nice, business, professional, casual, wearing suits and whatnot. And then there's like just this dude in a bee suit, and everyone else is looking at me, while they're doing their thing. And then I go up and give the talk, and like it was just this wild burst of like chaotic energy that helped me perform really well and ended up winning the whole thing. And it's like, that is not an outcome that I ever imagined or foresaw. But I don't think, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but like you appreciate what a lesson that is for me, and what it was for me of like, there's no rule. Wear a bee suit, wear a beekeeping suit, just put it on. And it ended up being like the superpower, right?
It is. And sometimes, it's related, and I do. It is this superpower that I have. I actually see things. It sounds really esoteric, but I see things, and it's as much for my career. It's probably the fortuitousness, but like I just see it, and I saw that. And, fundamentally, it's like you need to stand out, right? So this has always been a challenge for me. I always joke that, when I go to a bar, even today, like I'll be with a friend, and the bartender will instantly remember them, and I'll be there. If I tip 20, it doesn't make a difference what I do.
Right.
I'm invisible. So I've always had, it's probably complex. So I think this notion of, all these people are presenting. Besides the idea, what's the extra little ingredient that can make you be remembered and stood out? Not dramatic, not like some of the politics and stuff that happened today, but just a genuinely something, and make someone laugh and smile, right? The power of making someone laugh or smile is better than anything you could probably have said in your amazing 10-minute pitch.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that's just another life lesson is how do you start to do that? And there are a lot of examples like, Richard Branson at Scale is like phenomenal on sort of that element of the performance to differentiate themselves. And you did it, but you have to, you can't just do it with nothing behind it.
Yeah.
You had an amazing story, an amazing pitch, actual product. So it's the extra thing that tips it in your scale. Like if you only rely on the image, it's no different than the social media faux.
Right.
I must be wonderful because everybody, gave me a thumbs up. You have to have the core substance there. It just is that little extra boom. And then that's awesome to hear. Like you felt it gave you that level of confidence because you were in clothing that you're like, I'm not comfortable in a suit and tie. And that only adds to the angst of standing up in front of 200 people and pitching. Right?
Yeah, there is a kind of deeper lesson there. Again, this is another like gift that you've given me. Ever since then, like that was the first time that I don't know, I guess I did something and you helped me feel like, I did that, or I found a strength or a skill in myself that really felt like my own thing. There was something I could own and use and, was unique. And, and then every day after that, cause I did the thing and then I came off stage and I was like, that was really fun. I enjoyed talking to these people. And, this was something that you always emphasized, when we would do presentation, practice and training is, anytime that you get up and you talk to a group of people, they want to see you have a good time. They want to see you, having fun and, feeling like confident and like enjoying yourself. Right. And that's a much better, you hear all these weird tips about like public speaking of like, I can't imagine everyone in their underwear. Like that's way too much effort. Like I don't even want to do that.
Right.
Like
makes me close my eyes.
Right. I have no idea who thought that up, but just assume everyone likes you and wants to see you have a good time because it's true. Like they're there in the audience. They want to see you succeed and enjoy yourself up there. And that kind of assumption of goodwill from other people, like everyone gets on stage presented. They assume that everyone is like noticing every, judgmental little thing about them. And like, no, the opposite is true. They're just there, part to be informed, to be entertained. And like most people are pretty nice and supportive actually. And like audiences they'll applaud for the dumbest things, like when a plane lands, but like there's something beautiful about that. That's just a gift that you've given me that keeps on giving, and I've explained that to people and I've given speeches at weddings, and stuff like that. People are like, man, like you seem like you enjoyed it. I'm like, I did because I assumed everyone wanted to hear it and had a good time. And they're like, oh, no one ever explained it to me. I'm like, well, there was this guy who told me to wear a beekeeping suit all these years ago and his name's Ian and, he's the greatest dude I've ever met. And I don't know. You never know. There must be millions of like, I'm just one student who you interacted with.
Yeah. And I appreciate, again, I've obviously coached a lot of teams, both national and at UNH that did really well. And people are like, oh my God, like congratulations. And I'm like, it's not me.
Right.
Like it wasn't my idea. I didn't put in all the hard work to do the research. I didn't stand up and have that passion. And so, so some advice, some tweaks on the side, but like, I appreciate the compliment, but it's really about the core of the person or the team that did it. Like it's just that simple. Again, check the ego at the door.
Right.
And it's good. For me, what I took out of that was if there are students that present well and do well and are happy, they're going to tell more students on campus to come. Like my end game, in addition to making sure that every student could be as successful as their capabilities were there, limitless, which is why I could coach multiple teams at the same time. It wasn't pitting one against the other. It was like, how can I help you maximize, be limitless, be infinity within limits, or I forget the expression. But it was also like, well, then how do we create the brand of the e-center to be able to get more students? Because still only a fraction of students out of the 10,000 or 13,000 students at UNH ever came through the door. So it was like, well, if that helps, then the next person has the audience sitting in the audience to be like, oh, I got to go there. Like that's the win. Like that is the takeaway.
Yeah.
Students to soar, like that is the greatest, they said, it's the golden gift.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the, what are they? I don't know what they call us in business, but it's like the 10 true believers, 10 true customers. Like you only really, to get to like, whatever your goal is, 1 million people buying your thing, like you really just need 5 or 10 people who have a really excellent experience.
Yep.
And then just word of mouth. And, I mean, certainly like that's exactly the approach you just described for the youth center. So I'm going to give every student who comes in here a really excellent toolbox and help them rise or find the capabilities within themselves to make whatever they want to make real and explore. And I mean, I am such a proselytizer for the Entrepreneurship Center. Like I have every student who's there now, I'm like, have you heard of the East Center? Like I should get a Bible or something, but yeah, gosh. Well, we've been going for 90 minutes and I think I told you that that's how long I'd be able to keep you for.
Well, I can tell you, this is such an honor. I always love seeing you. So it's sort of like the best friend that you don't have to see each other every week
100%.
And you get back together.
Nothing's
and it's
changed.
like, it just is just so comforting and so proud of you. I know I said this to you off mic, but so proud of your journey and having watched you do the amazing things that you've done. And now with this podcast, which isn't going to be, it's only the newest foundation from which you're going to leap.
Washed up podcaster.
So thanks for having me. It's really been an honor. And thanks for like opening parts of my brain I hadn't thought about and actually making connections for me on my own, 60 plus years of life. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thanks for, I mean, we could talk all day.
I know we could.
We got to have you on again. I'm not against that. But you're the best. You've given me so many things and can't imagine a better 12th first guest on the pod.
Always better to be a dozen than
Yeah.
the baker's dozen.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks
Ian.
so much.
Hey there. Thanks for spending some time with us, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can learn more about today's guest and how to get involved with or support their work in the show notes. If you'd like to suggest a guest for the show or have any story tips for our Good News in New Hampshire newsletter, shoot me a message at hello@granitegoodness.com. Music for this episode was provided by the band Sneaky Miles, who hail from Newmarket, New Hampshire. Recording space was provided by Treeline Outfitters in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Until next time, I'm the creator of Granite Goodness and the host of the Granite Goodness podcast, Andy DeMeo. Thanks for listening.